Welcome to the TFD Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Sullivan, and this is the show where we break down popular science into easily digestible and actionable information to give you the blueprint to be a high performer in your life. Today, I'm joined by TFD Performance Dietitian Ryan Hasell, and we're talking about BCAAs. In today's episode, we'll unpack what BCAAs are, the intended purpose of using them, and whether or not science actually supports them or not. Let's get to it.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. My name is Ryan Hasell, also known as the Dojo Dietitian, and today I'm here with the most hated dietitian in Sweden, Jordy Sullivan. In today's episode, we're going to be chatting about something that we get asked about so much, and that is BCAAs. I don't know about you, Jordy, but for me, this is probably second only to like creatine in terms of questions from clients. So I think this would be a good topic to kind of run over today. So we'll kind of like take a look at what BCAAs are, where they fit into, I guess we'll get into like protein and stuff as well. Some of the theory around how BCAAs work, and then also kind of like dig into practical applications, how to use that knowledge in order to sort of optimize muscle growth, recovery, performance, all that good stuff. Welcome, Jordy.
Dojo, that was a good intro. We were just talking off air, and I hope Loz listens to this because I was running her name through the dirt. How she has such unenthusiastic introductions, and I'm just gonna wait for the plethora of comments that I get from most hated dietitians in Sweden. They'll be like, "What does that mean?" And I'll dig into it and be like, "Oh, that's actually really funny." But yeah, BCAAs. Whenever I do our weekly Q&As, I think I've answered this question, and then I'm not kidding. Like over the time that I've done the Q&As, I think I've answered it no less than 50 times. And I still get this question every single. I don't know. Like I feel like at a point, I feel like some people, maybe they're just taking the mickey out of me and they're just doing it like to stir me up maybe. But like there are new followers I know that come on because obviously you can see who's asking the question who genuinely still wants to go with BCAAs. Like, should I be taking them? It's crazy, right? Because I think BCAAs are obviously going to go through the theoretical science, and then we'll talk about what that means in practice and why we don't necessarily recommend them to our athletes. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It's just, and we're going to get into it. It's just, there's probably better things that you can be taking. We'll talk about why that is. It highlights two really important things that I think, yes, we're talking about BCAAs, but highlights a really much bigger issue, and that's misinformation and marketing in the nutrition space. Really, they're two massive issues. Like spread of misinformation, you can look anywhere across nutrition and you're going to find misinformation, and then people are just left to their own devices to interpret that and analyze that and see how it applies to them. And then marketing, once you get misinformation and you put that with good marketing, that's quite dangerous. And I think that's what we see very prevalently with BCAAs. You get a lot of half or quarter truths, and you put a lot of misinformation out there, but then you really shine that up with some clever marketing. You throw it out to people, and then all of a sudden, even if you kind of know that they're not really that useful, you start questioning it because you've got, all of these athletes or people promoting it and being like, these are great, or you see other people drinking it, like, oh, maybe they're getting something or some type of edge that I don't know about. And that's a huge problem in nutrition. So this is going to be a cool episode to go through BCAAs, yes, for one, but the thought process you should be going through whenever you hear anything in this space, whenever you hear anything about not just supplements, but any type of nutrition information, and you're like, oh, should I be eating bull's testicles or whatever, or, are plants bullshit? Maybe you should use this thought process to rationalize out yes or no. Should I not, or should I be doing that?
Yeah, no, I think that'd be good. So let's kind of like try and squash some of that misinformation here. Probably a good place to start is just taking a look at like what BCAAs actually are, like sort of big picture of where they fit into everything like nutritionally. So I guess like a quick overview of BCAAs is to just say that they are a type of amino acid. And we've talked about amino acids before, we've talked about protein before, but just to kind of like rehash all of that, amino acids are basically what we would consider like the building blocks of protein. And BCAAs are just branched chain amino acids. So there are a certain type of these amino acids. They just have like a long chain basically hanging off them. Now, when we talk about amino acids, again, being the building blocks, there's 20 different ones, 9 of which we would consider essential, meaning they have to come from food in our diet. The other ones, we can make all of those in our own body from different bits and pieces of other molecules, but these 9 ones we have to get from our food. So of those 9, 3 of those are what we would consider to be branched chain amino acids. So those 3 essential amino acids are the ones that we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, when we talk about these essential amino acids, as I said, they have to come from food. Now, in terms of these 3 branched chain amino acids in particular, like, why do we consider them to be so important, and like, why do they get talked about so much? The answer is, like, these 3 of those 9 make up a huge percentage of our muscle protein. So of our muscle proteins, around like 35% of that is made up just of these 3 particular branched chain amino acids. So like, even though they're a small number in terms of the whole picture, they make up a pretty large portion of our muscle protein. And they're also involved in a lot of the signaling pathways and stuff that kind of go into our body telling us to make new protein, maybe after we've exercised and broken some down. So yeah, in kind of theory, these branched chain amino acids are pretty important when it comes to muscle and muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah, I think this is really good. And if we're going to explain this process of, okay, how do you squash this misinformation? This is a very good first step, right? Because this is important, because this is the facts. These, what we're stating right now, are the facts of what we know about these branched chain amino acids. And like Dojo said, the amino acids, we're very familiar what they are. We've got essential and non-essential amino acids. We've got non-essential, and then the BCAAs, which are leucine, isoleucine, and valine, are 3 essential amino acids that are heavily involved in muscle protein synthesis. And then when you think about BCAAs, what do they use? Most people use them. Okay, if I'm going to be training, I want to use them to build more muscle or whatever else. That is fact. There is absolutely fact that yes, BCAAs do make up a good portion of the muscle protein synthesis signaling pathway, which is a fancy word for our body figuring out, okay, what do I do with what's coming in? So if I've just worked out and then I've got all these proteins, what do I do with it? And these branched chain amino acids will tell our body, hey, yeah, you know what's a good idea to build up more muscle. And a lot of that muscle, 35% roughly, is these amino acids, these 3 amino acids. So everything we said right now is absolute fact. And it's important to think, okay, well, how much of that have I heard from, say, marketing or whatever? Because that is fact. But what we're about to talk about, this point and then the following point, is really important when this comes into, okay, how is this useful in the real world? Is it practical? Does it apply to me?
Yeah. And I think, like, just to kind of build off that quickly too, is like, so we've got those 3 branched chain amino acids, as you just said, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And one that is like kind of thrown in the ring a lot, and you hear about a lot, is leucine. And that's kind of the main one that's involved in like kicking off that whole process around muscle protein synthesis. And it's also one that's talked about a lot because it's a really important one to consider for athletes that are maybe going down like a plant-based protein diet, because some of the foods we've talked about, like the differences in like amino acid profiles between animal and plant proteins. We won't go into that too much now, but essentially a lot of plant-based sources can be lower in leucine. So it becomes like an important thing to consider for these athletes to make sure they're getting enough food or like enough sources of protein that can contain leucine in their diet. So I think because of that, and like the whole importance that's kind of placed on leucine from the perspective of plant-based diet, it's kind of like built up this, I don't know, like importance around leucine to make it seem like it's kind of like the be-all and end-all amino acid if you're trying to build muscle. Because for these plant-based athletes, it kind of is, but for everyone else, like it still kind of holds that weight because it's discussed so much. And then you find all these supplements that are like high in leucine and all that kind of stuff. And it promotes this idea, I guess, of like, okay, if you want to build muscle, you're going to need heaps of this leucine, right? And in theory, that kind of makes sense. So I guess let's talk about then, like, if we've got this theory, okay, these amino acids are really important in starting that process, they're involved in the actual building, like they make up a lot of the actual physical proteins. How does that translate into like, if I take these amino acids, am I going to end up with more muscle? What's your thoughts on this, Jordy?
Yeah, I think when it comes to leucine, right, I think one concept I use a lot when I explain this to clients is just how complex metabolism is, right? And I think this applies to many things in biology, not just biology, actually, in many different types of science. I use the example, and I don't know if this is just because I'm a bit of a science nerd, but say biomechanics, or when we used to do physics, and you had to work out, okay, we've got person A, and he's going to throw a javelin or whatever through the air. He's going to exert X amount of force on that javelin. He's going to throw it at this angle, at this speed. How far does that javelin go? If you know biomechanics and you know physics and you know Newton's laws, you can theoretically work out, okay, that's exerting this much force through this pivot point. We've got this angle. It's at this projection. It's going at this speed. We should be able to figure out how far that it goes. And in a perfect world, you can. But anyone who does any applied science, like practical world science, you know that it's not that simple. You know, in the real world, it is very difficult to get a very uniform output from someone throwing a javelin. They could throw it 5 times and put a different amount of newtons or a different amount of force on each throw. They're not going to hit that same throw at the same angle every single time. When they throw it, it's not running through a system where there's nothing in the air. There's air resistance that you have to take into account. So the number that you end up getting in this perfect system is probably not going to be the one that actually happens in real life. And I think this is a great example when we talk about leucine, right? Because leucine, in theory, should have all these great things that happen with it. But that's when we isolate that system amongst the many thousands of other systems that work in with this complex thing we call metabolism. And then we go, you know what? Because it applies to this one system, we have to kind of forget all of these other things for that to work. And it's the same when you throw a javelin and you're working out how far it goes. You have to forget about all these other things, all these other factors that will actually affect what happens in real life. When we talk about leucine and its effect, in an ideal world, for it to happen and all of these things, we have to forget about all these other systems and all of these other things that are working in real time that will affect that outcome of this thing, and that thing being leucine. So I hope that makes sense, is that in theory, yeah, it makes perfect sense. But when we go to put it in practice, there's all these other considerations we have to keep in mind that pretty drastically change the outcome of what actually happens, which is what we'll go into now.
Yeah. And so, that's a really good way to think about it. I think it's like, it's just getting too hung up on like one particular piece of like the whole puzzle here, right? Because like to kind of like bring some context in here, BCAAs are like a really heavily studied supplement at this point. It's not something that we're kind of like still on the fence about. Like it's pretty well shown now that like exclusively using BCAAs as like a supplement to try and enhance muscle growth is going to actually, like in most cases, either like basically not have any effect at all, or like in some cases it can even like reduce the efficiency of like muscle protein synthesis. So like it's kind of counterintuitive here, right? When you think about like, oh, well, like it's an important step and it's like an important building block. It's all these cool things like in the process, but if we get too fixated on it and that's all we're doing, you kind of strip away all these other things that are kind of integral to that process as well. And you can lead to, like getting less muscle protein synthesis. So they've looked at like comparing people exercising with no supplements versus like BCAAs, or exercising with like whey protein versus BCAAs, like complete protein sources, whole food protein sources. And BCAAs just seem to come up short every single time. And a lot of that is kind of due to, or thought to be due to, like, just isolating too much and going too focused into like particular nutrients and forgetting about the bigger picture of all of these other nutrients that are actually involved as well. So when we do talk about this muscle protein synthesis, or like the process of our bodies building muscle protein, yes, it uses leucine and it uses these other two branched chain amino acids, and they're really important for that process, but so are all of the other amino acids that are like involved in that system. So like in order to actually optimize muscle protein synthesis, you have to have good availability of all of the amino acids, not just the essential ones. And so like maybe if you're a plant-based plant-based athlete and you're eating a lot of protein, but some of the sources are lower in leucine, maybe supplementing leucine at that point will like top up your leucine levels to like the same level as the rest of your proteins, and then that's going to help to build more muscle. But outside of like that case scenario, for like general people or like athletes that are following I guess like a more like omnivorous diet, like they're able to eat both plant animal sources of protein, they're probably not going to have that issue of lacking in certain amino acids. And so supplementing certain amino acids isn't really going to make up much of a difference. They're just going to be better off with like, I guess what we always talk about, right? Which is just nailing the fundamentals first. So things like looking for food sources of protein first, making sure you're getting enough protein over the day, making sure you're distributing it over the day, timing it around trainings. All of these fundamental things are going to give you a way better bang for your buck in terms of like optimizing muscle growth, recovery, all of that kind of stuff to do with performance, versus just looking for this kind of like, how can I pay to get bigger muscles or improve my training through like buying these overpriced supplements that are just marketed really well, right?
Yeah, the example that I use with people a lot that resonates really well is I say using BCAAs in terms with the goal of getting better muscle protein synthesis is like jumping into a pool and then grabbing a cup and tipping that water on your head with the goal of getting more wet after you've already jumped in the pool. Like if you've got a good food first diet, even if you are using protein supplements like an essential amino acids where you get all 9 essential amino acids, or you've got whey protein isolates where you're getting high quality digestible amino acid protein sources, you don't need it. Like you don't need it because like Dojo said, you're getting all of those essential amino acids that are going to be contributing to this process. So when you zoom out of that process and you're not just looking at leucine and isoleucine and valine, you need all of those amino acids to make that process work, and you're getting that in your food. So if you've already got it and then you're adding extra in there, it is like jumping into a pool and then putting more water on your head from a cup to become more wet. There's just no point. Like it's not necessarily like being wet isn't a bad thing, but it's not making you any wetter, if that makes sense to people listening. And it's an important thing to realize, because when we're talking about, you know, this misinformation and taking half truths and quarter truths and then marketing them in a way to make them seem like something that you're not, BCAAs are the best example of this. They are the best example of taking what that process me and Dojo just explained there. You know what? There is a load of research about this. So when people say that BCAAs are heavily studied, they are heavily studied. That's absolutely true. And when they say BCAAs are important for muscle protein synthesis, that is true. That is true, but they're half truths, because not only are BCAAs important, all of the essential amino acids are important. If you can get all of those essential amino acids, what we've seen time and time again in every single study, not every single, I'll say what we see time and time again in the weight of the evidence is that BCAAs fall short of complete food sources, of complete supplement sources of protein, such as whey protein isolates or essential amino acids, all the time. And they're just not what they're hyped up to be when we take these half truths and we mix them with flashy marketing. And it's important people understand that, because hopefully it makes a bit more sense when you look at other things. And for that to make sense, I will admit it can be difficult because you have to have a certain degree of knowledge. If you're just hearing that for the first time, right? Like you're like, that kind of makes sense and I can kind of rationalize that. But it's not till you dig in a bit deeper and step back, and instead of looking at that isolated system, you look at it as a whole, you go, yeah, actually that doesn't make sense at all. Like it actually kind of seems a little silly. And I can't believe I just paid $70 for a tub of that. Like that's very silly. But the thing is like you have to have the sense to sit back and look at that and go, yeah, okay, I can see the whole picture now.
Yeah. It's something that hopefully like we can provide that sort of knowledge here through like our content and like the podcast and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that episode's been helpful for squashing some of the misconceptions around BCAAs. So just to kind of like run back over everything, BCAAs, they sound cool, like it's a big marketing thing, but all they really are is just like, it's a type of amino acid. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. We get them through our diet, through eating meats, like dairy, eggs, some plants, beans, everything. There's a lot of sources of protein out there. You don't have to get BCAAs from a supplement. There's plenty of other better ways to get them. And yeah, I guess, yeah, watch out for the dodgy marketing, I guess. But
yeah, and I think the principles that we talk about in this, you can apply it to a lot of things, right? It's important to really keep your critical thinking hat on, because nutrition as a science is really difficult because it's always evolving and it's very difficult to study. To know anything in nutrition, you pretty much have to do a lifetime worth of studies. And by the time you figure out whatever it is you're studying, your lifetime's over. And it's like, so sad, see ya. And it's really difficult. But it's important, like I said earlier, if we look at things like eating bull's testicles or saying that vegetables are bullshit or whatever, you can look at those things and you can take the arguments that are given to prove those things. And more often than not, maybe they have some weight when you look at a very isolated system. But the skill is being able to stand back and go, okay, cool, that may work in that very isolated system. But when we look at the body as a whole and the hundreds of thousands of chemical reactions that make up the human metabolism, how does that fit in? And how much weight does that really have in the big picture, in the big system, when we're looking at eating bull's testicles or saying that veggies are bullshit? And then it becomes a lot clearer and go, okay, you know what? Maybe in the big picture and the big scheme of things, that's probably not as important. But if you really want to dial in on that and you want to flash it up with some cool marketing and then tell people, that's very, very easy to do. You just need to be very mindful of that and be very aware of it. And again, like, I don't want to throw BCAAs under the bus. Like, BCAAs are just BCAAs. They didn't choose to be glorified and do this. Like, they did nothing wrong, but they've just found themselves in this thing. Like, it's not their fault, but you just need to take them for what they are. And what they are is everything we just discussed. They're just these 3 amino acids. Yes, they're important for the muscle protein synthesis process, but taking additional BCAAs when you've already got enough adequate dietary protein is just not going to do anything for you.
All right, should we leave it there? I think that pretty much covers BCAAs pretty conclusively.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions about this, hopefully we see the amount of questions on the weekly Q&A about BCAAs go down. But if you do have more about it, feel free to jump on there and blast a few. I'll send them to Dojo though, so he can answer them.
Cheers, Jordy.